Enter Origami, who faces off against a girl wearing a CR unit. With her teammates down, she strikes from behind to no avail. At that moment, a woman's voice says that time has run out. It's then revealed that the girl fought against Ten by herself and has already destroyed a god's spirit. She then introduces herself as Mana Takamiya, a second lieutenant wizard. Ryuko then invites her to join the squadron in briefing. While watching, Origami asks Mana how she destroyed his spirit, so she explains that not all spirits are equal. Suddenly, Mana sees Shidou on the video feed and mysteriously calls him her brother, shocking Origami. Later, Origami confronts Mana about Shidou and claims that he's her boyfriend. Meanwhile, at school, Miss Okamin announces a new transfer student that will be joining the class. The new student introduces herself as Kurumi Tokisaki and instantly announces that she's a spirit. She then asks the class if one could show her around. Tanamechi quickly volunteers but is shot down by Kurumi. Instead, she asks Shidou to guide her around, which he reluctantly agrees to. Back at the Tengu military base, the group receives reports on a new spirit, revealing that it's the deadliest of them all with the codename as Nightmare. Back with Shidou, Kotori instructs him to make her fall in love with him before the ASD can intervene. Aboard Fraxinus, they monitor the duo's activity from the screen, where they vote for what Shidou should respond with. Meanwhile, Tohka and Origami observe the two, where she comments that nobody will get between her and Shidou. Eventually, however, Kurumi asks him if he would like to take a sussy peek, so she slowly lifts her skirt, but Shidou stops her. However, she reveals that she knows everything about him in spirits. She then adds that she has had her eyes on him for a long time, thus she takes his hands and asks for a favor, but the girls accidentally reveal themselves. Origami then quickly states that students are forbidden to hold hands and orders Kurumi to let go. After school, Kurumi thanks Shidou and Tohka for showing her around before running off. Shortly after, Kurumi bumps into a man, but two more come out of an alley and begin threatening her. She then realizes that the three men are planning to do bad things, so she guides them to a nearby alley and make them splatter. Suddenly, Man appears before her and confronts her. Elsewhere, Shidou and Tohka are on their way home, but encounter Mana. He then asks confused if Tohka knows her, but she doesn't. As such, Mana runs up to Shidou and calls him Big Brother, completely surprising everyone. She then meets Kotori for the first time, where Yoshinan mentions how the two look alike. However, Shidou claims that he doesn't remember her, at which Mana explains that she also doesn't remember much from the past until recently. To prove her point, Mana displays a locket containing a picture of her and Shidou as kids, shocking both he and Kotori. Kotori then kicks him and says that he's her older brother too, causing an argument between the girls. The next day at school, Teimi checks the attendance, but Kurumi is missing, so Origami voices out that Kurumi will no longer come into school. Just then, Kurumi appears and excuses herself for being late. Later at lunch, Shidou goes to the physics room to meet Kotori, and Rain shows him a surveillance footage of Mana confronting Kurumi with AST nearby. Kurumi is then quickly wounded by Mana and gets knocked out. Regardless, Mana moves in closer and finishes off Kurumi. As such, the group wonders how she's still alive. Meanwhile, Origami confronts Kurumi and tells her that she should be dead. Kurumi then uses her shadow hands and abruptly reminds her that she isn't dead no more and that she's here not for AST but for Shidou. She then threatens Origami to never get in her way with Shidou, maniacally laughing, claiming that she wants Shidou all to herself. After class, Shidou invites Kurumi on a date, with which she happily accepts. As he ponders over how she's alive, Origami confronts him and demands an explanation. However, he excuses himself and leaves. She then thinks about how Kurumi contemplated on devouring her, but she let her go. Nevertheless, after school, Shidou apologizes to Tohka for not showing up at lunch and asks if she ate. Remembering lunch, she has not actually touched her bento since she was waiting for Shidou to return, eventually crying looking for him. Afterwards, Tohka tells some classmates she's still waiting for Shidou and cries, but the girls comfort her. Back in the present, the two arrive home, where Tohka mysteriously locks the door behind her and closes the curtains. Shidou then heads to her, but she crawls on the ground with tickets in her mouth. Now completely confused, he retreats, and Tohka places the tickets in a sussy place and asks if they could go on a date, so a confused Shidou accepts. He then gets a phone call from Origami, who also asks him out on a date, forcing him to deal with a triple date. The next day at Tengu Station, Kotori chides Shidou for being triple booked on an important day. However, he blames her for telling him not to cancel on both Tohka and Origami. Regardless, she reassures him that Fraxinus will be helping him out all the way. Tohka then arrives and demands that they leave now, and just as they leave, the crew spots Origami, who has surprisingly arrived early. They then head to an aquarium, but Kurumi shows up early as well. Nevertheless, inside the aquarium, Tohka is quickly astonished by the sea creatures, but Kotori tells Shidou he must meet Kurumi now, so he fakes his stomachache. Outside, Shidou finds a secluded area and is teleported by Fraxinus, allowing him to apologize to Kurumi for being late. Regardless, the two head out to find a sushi shop, where she asks him which one would suit her the best. A moment later, the changing room opens and reveals Kurumi, but Mayumi appear asking him why he's with Kurumi. Suddenly, Kotori tells Shidou he needs to quickly meet origami, so he fakes a stomachache while the girls chase after him. Meanwhile, at the military base, Mana is with a group of scientists wiring her suit. Back with Shidou, he loses the trio and meets up with origami, again apologizing for being tardy. The two then stop at a restaurant where she asks Shidou to come by her place after the movie. Meanwhile, Kotori is alerted that Tohka has now come to look for Shidou. As such, Shidou sees Tohka looking for him, so he excuses himself again. He then calls out to Tohka, but her stomach growls, so he invites her to eat at a sushi restaurant. Back with Shidou and Tohka, he feigns another stomach ache and is immediately transported to Kurumi. As the triple date continues, Shidou has to evade being seen by the trio, but is luckily aided by Yoshino. Later, while getting a drink, Kurumi hears a kitten nearby. Back on Fraxinus, their video feed suddenly goes out, and at the same time, Tohka bumps into origami, where they both claim they're looking for Shidou. As such, they accuse each other of lying, but origami runs off to look for him with Tohka following. At the park, Kotori tells Shidou that they lost sight of Kurumi, so he was to find her. Out in the woods, he finds the nearby area splattered all over, causing him to panic. Then, a familiar voice calls out to him, and he finds Kurumi aiming a gun at one of the delinquents who begs Shidou to save him. As he continues to look on in horror, Kurumi summons shadowy hands and grabs Shidou, preventing him from escaping. She then prepares to destroy him as well, but is luckily saved by Mana, who asks if he's okay. However, he's bewildered by her appearance. Mana then opens fires with her finger-guided laser beams and severely wounds Kurumi, while without hesitation, proceeds to end her. Now distressed over what just happened, Shidou asks Mana how could she live with that, but she replies saying it's her duty. As such, she asks him to forget what just happened, as she claims that Kurumi won't stay dead for long, revealing that she has ended Kurumi many times before. Suddenly, she finds an earpiece on the ground and hears someone's voice telling Shidou to abort. Regardless, back at the station, Tohka and origami finally spot Shidou walking alone. Tohka then notices a bruise on his hand, and he immediately jerks his hand away before running off from the two. Afterwards, Shidou returns and continues his date with Tohka. After heading to a restaurant to eat, Shidou reveals that he actually can't pay for the meal, but Rain has allowed Tohka to borrow her credit card. Furthermore, Tohka mentions that Rain has revealed what has happened with Kurumi, thus, she reminds Shidou that because of him, he showed her how wonderful the world can be. Now with his confidence back, he thanks her for all her support. After gaining some insight to Kurumi, the next day, Shidou declares to Kurumi that he'll save her. However, she heads to the school rooftop while encasing the school in her field to dissuade Shidou from trying to save her. Meanwhile, Mana confronts Kotori about Ratatoskr and attempts to use it as leverage against her so she'll release Shidou from the potential danger he's in. Back at school, Kurumi threatens the school and the town, while origami and Tohka engage in battles against other copies of Kurumi. Afterwards, Shidou finally convinces Kurumi, but she unfortunately gets destroyed by a carbon copy of herself, since she can twist time using Zafkiel. As such, Tohka and origami then show up, where it's revealed that the hands in Kurumi's shadow are actually the hands of past versions of herself. Nevertheless, Kurumi takes everyone hostage and attempts to blow a spatial quake only for it to be blown away. Suddenly, Kotori appears in her own astral dress as the Efreet Flame Spirit, explaining the spatial quake cancellation and proceeds to battle Kurumi.